Hello, welcome to the Colors for Crafts podcast, the podcast that aims to educate, inform, and engage our audiences about the meanings of color, textile, and craft coloration practices, and the future of color through research, education, and experiences stemming from the Colors for Crafts project based at the University of Helsinki. I am your host, Dr. Dustin Neighbors. In this episode, I am joined by Nika Usmiani, the winner of the Colors for Craft 2025 International Student Design Competition, to talk about her winning design collection. Join us as we discuss Nika's connection to natural colorants, her design process and inspiration, and the future of natural colorants. Please allow me to introduce our guest. Nika Usmiani is a textile technology and engineering student at the University of Zagreb, specializing in clothing design for industry. Her work focuses on sustainable textile practices, particularly textile dyeing and printing with natural colorants, in dialogue with contemporary design. Her academic work includes a bachelor's thesis on pigment printing with natural plant dyes, reflecting a strong interest in environmentally responsible textile processes. She has gained international experience through projects such as Green Text Erasmus Plus at the University of Erevo and the multidisciplinary workshop All Colors of Montenegro, where she explored traditional wood dyeing techniques using plant-based materials. Nika, welcome. Why don't we just start off with an easy question? What is your research background and how did you come to be a student of textile technology engineering?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. So since I'm still a student, my research background mainly comes from my bachelor's thesis, where I focused on pigment printing with natural plant dyes, and from the international projects I've been part of, like Green Text Erasmus Plus and All Colors of Montenegro, where I explored traditional wool dyeing techniques using plant-based materials. I chose to study textile technology engineering because I wanted to combine my two passions, my love for design and for science. When I was little, I used to draw constantly, and as I grew up, I started focusing more on academics and found a passion there as well. So when it came time to choose my major, the choice felt pretty natural.
You talk about pigment printing. And so automatically I think of technology. So is this type of printing, when we're thinking about printing, is it a printer that you would go and print material out of? Or is this like an old school screen printing where you've got a wooden frame and there's a pigment over it and then you just kind of brush coloration across that, like an old school kind of printing on a t-shirt?
Yes, it's old school printing. So I have a frame, I develop the pattern on the frame, and then you press the pigment through the printing paste.
What do you hope to eventually get to with this research? Because you said you're a student, you're starting out, it feels natural, and you're passionate about it. Initially, what is the goal with this research?
Well, when I first started my education, I realized how polluting the textile industry can be. And then I started questioning if I chosen the right field because I didn't want to contribute to this problem. And that perspective changed during my studies because I had a course where two of my professors, I have to mention them, Professor Sutlovic and Professor Glogar, they introduced me to natural colorants. And they didn't just teach the subject, they really changed the way I see the field. And what surprised me was how many beautiful, harmonious tones you can get with natural dyeing. And that's when it kind of clicked. And I realized how many beautiful designs can be created with natural colorants. And at the same time, you can push for change within the industry. And this is kind of where my interest peaked.
That was one of the things that when I joined this project that I was completely unaware of. The mass pollution that happened from natural colorant or synthetic dyeing, especially in the industry. So it's very interesting to me to see that side of it. And I was never aware of it before. And that's one of the things that makes this project so great is the fact that it is something to look at. And it's great to see students like you who are thinking about that in the forefront. Like, do I want to contribute to this industry in that way? How can I make a difference? This is a great segue because you brought it up, natural dyes. So my next question is, what is your interest connection to natural colorants or natural dyes?
As I said, when I was studying, these two professors had an enormous love for natural colorants, and they were able to transfer their love to us students. And I just really started working with them because I liked the tones that you can produce with them. It was a big surprise for me. I didn't know at the time that that was possible. And I really like that in my field, I can make a positive impact or a positive difference. And this is what kind of sticked with me. And then once I started working with natural dyes, it felt very grounding. My professor always says working with natural colorants teaches you about life, about how it can be unpredictable.
Well, let's again shout out to your professors because
Yeah.
for getting you and started in this and teaching you this. It's interesting when we think about natural colorant because for me, I'm naturally drawn to green. Green is my favorite color. And it's interesting to see that it's not as a synthetic dye. It's one of those colors that it comes out really bright, really green. I never thought about how do you produce that with natural ingredients. May I ask what your favorite color is in terms of like the natural colors? Is there a particular one that's your favorite?
Yes, it's also green. It's a bit harder to produce as far as we've tried, but it's also my favorite color, yes.
You get it, man. You everything I wear is pretty much green. So we talk about this, the International Student Design Competition that is organized by the Colors for Craft Project and the Textile Institute in the UK. What was your motivation for entering this competition?
Well, my motivation really came from my love for natural colorants. And I guess I was just interested in finding ways to expand their use, to make them more relevant and more present in today's textile design.
And was there anything that stood out to you in terms of the call itself? And how did you find out about the call? Was it on social media or did your professors tell you about this particular competition?
Yes, my professor knew my interest, so she told me about the competition and said that I have to apply and try it out. So I did.
As the winner, congratulations on winning.
Thank you.
It would be nice for our listeners. How would you describe your design collection? What was the goal of the collection and what did the design process involve? So let's start with how would you describe your design collection for this competition?
So my design collection is tied together by one main theme, plants. So I drew aesthetic inspiration from an endemic plant. I use natural dyes derived from plants, and I chose linen as a plant-based fiber. So the whole collection is really a celebration of cultural heritage and the value of traditional materials. But at the same time, it highlights the sustainability of plant-based textiles and how they can be relevant in modern design. And that really ties into the goal of the collection, which was to show that these materials aren't just traditional, but they can actually be part of a more sustainable future in textile design.
That's an interesting perspective that you bring with your collection because one of the questions I asked myself, I earlier, I'm a historian, so cultural heritage, my ears perk up. But there's this question or this debate between tradition, the past, and the future and sustainability. Can the two go hand in hand together? If somebody were to ask you that, how would you respond? Does history and sustainability, tradition, old practices and sustainability and the future and industry, can it actually work together?
Well, I didn't want to follow the tradition word by word. I wanted to reinterpret it a bit. And I think that we can always take inspiration from tradition and reinterpret it in another way. And of course, using traditional crafts and connecting them to modern technology is amazing because, I mean, we knew what was important in the past even a bit more, if I can say that.
Absolutely. And one of the things about the project that's been so great, and I noticed that you included in your design portfolio, was the process of extracting the dye and making that into a dye itself. And that ties to that tradition. So I think there's an element of where experimentation or figuring out how they did it in the past, but how can we make that past practice something that's sustainable for the future. You're one of those that's actually doing that. What we saw for your portfolio is you extracted it in a very traditional way. You explain the process that they would have done. And the way that you're interpreting it and applying it is very modern, it's very futuristic and sustainable. What was the goal of the collection? Is it to show your interpretation? Was it to feature natural color plant? What was the goal?
My goal was to show the chromatic potential of natural colorants because I myself wasn't aware of their potential before I started this journey and before my professors introduced me to them. But I also wanted to show that they aren't just traditional. You can truly use it in modern textile design and make it sustainable.
I noticed one of the elements that you use, or one of the interesting and unique parts of your collection, was you use ties. As someone who wears a lot of ties, but also as a historian, I love the old look of ties, the evolution of the ties itself. Why ties?
Well, as for the neckties, there's a strong historical connection. The modern necktie actually originates from the Croatian cravat. It was worn by soldiers in the 17th century in the 30 Years' War. And also in our folk tradition, brides gifted cravats as symbols of fidelity. But I also chose the necktie because it's a highly visible accessory. It's positioned very close to the face, and color and detail are immediately perceived in such a position. Moreover, it's also typically associated with industrially dyed silk and strict consistency standards. So, by using plant based dyes in that context, in such a formal accessory, I was able to show that natural dyes can confidently stand in such a refined contemporary design.
I like that. A refined contemporary design. I think you achieved that very well. I'm hoping our listeners will get a chance to see the exhibition and see your work. We will also making it into a digital exhibition. So you've talked about your design collection, you've talked about the inspiration. What about the process? Was there anything unique about the process? How long did it take, the whole process?
Well, it was months. So I started with the plant-based inspiration and then I collected the materials. I didn't want to choose any color in advance. I was guided by what the environment could provide. And the only deliberate color was yellow. And after that, I went through mordanting, natural dyeing, and textile printing. And in the end, I designed the pattern, cut the fabric, and sewed the final neckties. So it really goes from nature all the way to the final piece.
That sounds like a very involved and long process. Was there any challenges that you struggled with or anything that surprised you?
One of my struggles was that when you work with natural colorants, you don't know exactly what you're going to get. So it's not that it's completely unpredictable, but nature never really gives you the same result twice. So even the same plant can produce slightly different tones every time. I had to learn to adapt, to let go of control a bit, and just accept the outcome. And in that way, it was actually a lot like life. It taught me about life.
Even in this process, even the dyeing process, from what I've seen with my colleagues, it is a curveball. You never know what you're going to get. And the thing that I really liked about what you were talking about is you used what was local, you used what was available, which also ties into the seasons of certain plants, what colors would be available throughout the year. And even the weather itself can affect the plant, can also affect the color that you come out with. I really like that you thought about that, that you incorporated into your design. Because if we think about sustainability, we have to think about all of those external factors that play into producing specific colors, producing natural colorants, and using natural colorants in the environment. Speaking of plant, it ties into this next question. In your proposal, you emphasized flat and Digenea velebiti plants and their connection to Croatia. You also represent traditional folk costumes and the heritage of Croatia. What are the connections between these plants and Croatia, and how does history play a role in designing your? But first, what is the connection between these plants and Croatia?
So flax has a long tradition in Croatia. It has been cultivated here since the Middle Ages. And it was especially important in rural areas where linen was used for traditional folk costumes as well as household textiles. However, over time, with the rise of cotton and later synthetic materials, flax gradually lost its importance. But still, I find it very, very interesting that today there are flax revival projects here in Croatia. So it shows that people are reconnecting with traditional materials and textile heritage again. As for the Velebidagenia, it is one of Croatia's most well-known endemic plant species, and it's an important part of our natural heritage. But also it is critically endangered and strictly protected. So for me, it carried both aesthetic and symbolic value within the collection. And yes, overall, history played a significant role in my design process because I was not interested in literally creating tradition, but taking these elements of Croatian heritage in a contemporary way.
I think that's one of the exciting things about your collection and the way that here's my design, here's my process, but also connecting it back to what I think is very important for humanity today is connecting it to identity. And our identity is often tied to our culture. And seeing that and bringing it back to what is a huge part of you, which is your culture in Croatia. You talk about the traditional folk costume in choosing or utilizing it as inspiration. And then this is kind of a side question. Are there any specific folk costumes that have inspired you throughout your career, not just specifically for this collection, and why?
Not as much. There's a difference between what I did and what traditional folk costumes are. For example, in the past, linen was never dyed, it was just bleached. And I still wanted to use the material they use, but also dye it. That was a difference between tradition and modern.
One of the things that I was very interested in is during your interview for the competition, you stated that you had a moment where you wondered what you wanted to do within your profession, and that this competition allowed you to, quote, challenge yourself and to be seen. What have you learned about yourself in this competition process?
So I think I learned how important it is to truly love what you do. I always heard people say, if you do what you love, you won't work a day in your life. But this was the first time that I truly understood what that really means. Because when you genuinely care about your work, then all the effort and the sacrifices really stop being sacrifices because the whole process itself, it gets meaning, it becomes meaningful. And also, this competition was the first time that I felt truly seen within my profession on such an international level. And that was incredibly motivating for me. It gave me confidence to begin a much longer journey of exploring natural colorants. And I'm very grateful for this experience. And ultimately, I'd say that my professional dream is to help raise awareness about the potential of natural colorants and to contribute, even in a small way, to making them more valued and more present within the textile industry. For me, my personal problem was that I would love to wear clothes dyed with natural colorants, but the reality is that you cannot find them in stores. They're not that available, and I would like to change that.
I agree with you that you don't often see naturally dyed clothing in stores, or if you do, or if you see it, naturally dyed yarn that's then created into a piece of clothing, they're usually often very expensive. And it's one of those things that you want to make sure that there is life with the garments themselves, that it becomes accessible and available widely. I think that what you were saying in terms of making it available, you would like to change that. You would like to see a future is available and accessible. So that leads to the question, what do you think is the future of natural colorants or natural dyes?
So I think natural colorants have a very bright future. That also depends on changing the way we think and about fashion and consumption. Today, fashion is often very fast, follows trends, and people are encouraged to constantly buy new things instead of developing a sort of personal connection with what they wear. So I think we need to reconnect with nature more and form more individuality. Of course, natural colorants cannot replace every single application, especially highly standardized protective clothing, but I think they have a strong future in everyday clothing, in clothing that is in direct contact with the skin, because it has been proven that natural colorants can provide textiles with antibacterial, hypoallergenic, and UV protective properties. I also think that the future of textile coloration could shift from something chemically standardized to something more biologically responsive. This is what we talked about, where color becomes more seasonal, more local. And also we could definitely combine traditional knowledge with modern technology.
One of the things that our project has emphasized and is utilized and looking into is also thinking about natural colorant, the practices itself can improve mental health. Getting out in nature, working with nature is a way of improving your mental health, of escaping kind of all the technology, to have that escape, that moment of being out in nature and going through the practice, whether you use certain craft practices such as natural dyes, if you do knitting, if you use knitting with specific naturally dyed yarn, these are all things that make you feel what we've learned from talking to researchers, to talking to craft people, to talking to people in general, is that knowing that you're working with something that is naturally dyed, that is good for the environment, also helps with that mental health of doing something good with the environment. So it's good to hear you talk about all of the advantages of the future of natural colorant. And it makes you wonder, if natural colorant is unstoppable, could it really change the world in many ways?
Yes, I mean, it could also connect to technology. We could combine natural colorants with digital printing, for example, and then we can preserve the warmth of natural color, but also achieve the precision of digital design. Maybe we could even integrate natural colorants into smart textiles. And then the fabrics wouldn't only respond to sensors, light, temperature, they could also be in touch with the sustainable forms of coloration.
When we talk about that we don't see natural color garments or naturally dyed garments in stores, there's a tension there that we're noticing, that we're seeing, that it's difficult or it's too time consuming, especially when we think of the industry. And one of the things that I was struck by in your interview for the competition, you mentioned, quote, that we need to accept how color varies when we're working with natural colors, and that this is a positive property of natural colorant because it illustrates authenticity of natural colors. What do you mean by this?
So what I meant by this is that natural colorants are biologically responsive. So their color can vary depending on climate, soil, or the specific plant we use. Unlike synthetic colorants, which are designed for perfect uniformity. Personally, I don't see this variability as a flaw, but as a positive property, because I think those small differences give textiles authenticity and make them feel more alive, more unique. Even nature is not perfectly uniform, and neither are people. So I don't really see why everything we wear should look completely identical either. Of course, this does require raising awareness and changing the consumer expectations. But I think younger generations are already becoming more interested in sustainability as well as individuality and just products that feel more connected to nature and to human touch rather than this perfect industrial uniformity.
I think you are the future of natural colorant. I think from based on your collection, based on how passionate you are about this, just from talking to you now, I think natural colorant is in good hands for the future. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about in terms of your collection, and as part of your competition submission, and for the Colors for Crafts final exhibition at the University of Leeds, you designed a giant patchwork tie. Can you describe the piece and the thought process behind producing it?
So the idea for the giant patchwork necktie was born from the leftover linen samples from my necktie collections. I had a lot of leftover samples, and then I realized that these remnants could still be a valuable resource. So I stitched around 800 linen squares into one 3-meter necktie, and it became a symbolic surface. So I could show the chromatic potential of natural colorants, but still embody the circular thinking through this reuse of textile remnants. So for me, this piece became like a celebration of sustainability and all the possibilities of natural colorants.
And if I may be so bold, it's also a celebration of tradition and heritage because the fact that okay, first of all, 800 pieces, that's insane.
It's a
Like,
lot.
were you sitting in front of the TV sewing because 800 pieces is a lot.
Yeah, no, I used the sewing machine, luckily. If
Okay.
it was done by hand, I don't know how long it would take.
Well, it does tie into this, but we were talking about tradition earlier of sitting
Hmm.
around and quilting, because that's one of the things that I loved about the piece was there's this nod to natural dyes, of sustainability, of that, but also of the past of quilting. The way you did the quilted pattern, which to me is what stood out because I'm always thinking this historical context. So it by you doing that, you are actually doing what they would have done in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. They would have made quilts using patchwork, what was available to them. And I think that this is a nod to that as well.
Of
It's a
course.
beautiful piece, it's huge, which is fantastic. So I'm looking forward to seeing it in person. I want to conclude with one final question that we asked all of our guests on the podcast. What does color mean to you?
So for me, color is incredibly meaningful because it creates an immediate response and sets the mood even before we notice the shape of the textile. I also see color as a way to communicate who we are, so our identity, our emotions. And when I work with natural colorants, color becomes even more special because it's tied to nature, it's tied to a place and a time. And natural colors, as we said, aren't perfectly uniform, and that gives this unique authenticity to each color. And at the same time, these subtle variations create a harmony that really kind of grounds us in the natural world.
That beautiful. I really like in which you say that it's grounding, working with colors, whether it's natural colors, but colors ground you and it connects you back to the world around you because oftentimes we associate like green with the outdoor world, with the trees, with the grass, all of those things. And I think that that is a very special way of looking at colors. It's not something that we've heard in our responses on this podcast. Nika, I want to thank you so much for your time today and speaking with you and talking about your collection. It's been fantastic. And again, we want to say a huge, hearty congratulations to you on being the winner. And we look forward to seeing what you do in the future.
Thank you so much, Shirley. I would just like to thank my faculty of textile technology in Zagreb, especially the Department of Textile Chemistry and Ecology, and my professors Sutlovic and Professor Glogar for their guidance. I would also like to thank Marco and my family for their support. And of course, I'm very grateful to Color for Crafts, the Textile Institute, and Dr. Leder for this incredible opportunity and for supporting young designers and researchers who are working towards more sustainable textile practices.